Welcome back to the Bitcoin Zodiac. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Dinny Collins from Bitcoin with Dinny. He is also the founder of the Bitcoin Island Conference. And in this episode, we talk about retiring early on Bitcoin, also hedging your existing retirement plans with Bitcoin, and also different custody options. So I really enjoyed having this conversation, and I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. Hi, Dinny. How are you? Welcome to the Bitcoin Zodiac. So excited to have you.
Thanks very much, Claire. Delighted to be here.
Good, good, good. So let's get stuck straight into it, I think. Tell us a little bit about yourself. I'm so interested in your Instagram content is so different to a lot of the Bitcoin content that we see. And so tell me how you got started in Bitcoin, a bit about your background, where you are in the world, and yeah, how you found yourself down the Bitcoin rabbit hole.
All right, awesome. I'm in Ireland, Dublin, Ireland. Um, like most of us who are in Bitcoin, I had numerous touch points, and was slowly orange pilled over the years, and then once I got it, of course, you fall deeper down the rabbit hole until it consumes a lot of your life in a really good way. Pre-Bitcoin, I've been an entrepreneur since I was 8 years of age. I had a golf ball collecting business. My quick background story is that my family would have struggled financially, in terms of living in Ireland. So not struggling in terms of how other families can struggle around the world, but
Right.
I just noticed my parents struggle for money, although working very hard all their life. So it was always my fantasy, my dream to, become rich and wealthy and be able to give my parents the comfortable life and have my dad drive a nice car. And that was always my motivation for trying to become a businessman or learn how to make money. And I've had loads of businesses. I ended up breaking my. I'm really passionate about motorcycles. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, I think it's a net positive, but it comes with some negatives. I broke my back off a motorcycle racing many years ago, and that the rehabilitation of that sent me down the whole fitness and health and recovery rabbit holes and the human body, and that was something I'd never really explored much before. And as I helped recover from my broken back and my surgeries, I discovered I was a new person. I had more confidence, more motivation, more self-belief than I ever had in my life before.
Mm.
And I sort of helped get moving again and get out of the pain. And it took a couple of years, like we're talking a 3 year journey. And my surgeons told me, previous to that, I was doing steelwork, the family business, which wasn't something that I enjoyed. I was quite good at it, but I didn't really have a passion for it. And the surgeon says, well, you can't do steelwork anymore because you're never going to be able to lift a bag of sugar. Never mind work in the steel industry. So I was like, right, what am I going to do? And I hadn't decided, but I was just, after becoming super fit and healthy, I was like, I feel amazing. I feel so good. And why not I'm being an entrepreneur. I was like, sure, I could just set up a fitness company and basically teach other people how to feel this way. Like, this is amazing. This is now my passion. And I've done that, and I still own a couple of fitness companies. And it's still a super passion of mine. I love training, all sorts of training. I'm not stuck in any one modality, like from yoga to swimming to endurance stuff to strength stuff to gymnastics. I just love moving. And I suppose when you break your back and you lie in a hospital bed for a couple of years, you appreciate the ability to move a bit more than someone who maybe hasn't gone through that. And I suppose then leading on and not taking up the whole podcast with my background story.
Okay.
But from there, after being in business for a while and reinvesting into myself constantly on education and mentorship and things to make me better at business, I started to make some money. And then I started to understand money a little bit better, and I started to understand investing and how to create more wealth, because my goal was always to, get rich, make my parents be wealthy, look after them financially, all this sort of stuff. So as I started to understand money, I started to understand investing, and then, you are exposed to Bitcoin. I was a gold investor, or I understood all the problems with money before I understood Bitcoin. So the transition from gold to Bitcoin for me was super easy. It was just like, oh my God, how have I missed this thing so many times? Like, this is
Yeah.
digital gold. It's so much more than that, but this is an easy on-ramp into Bitcoin. And then, like I say, I sort of did get Bitcoin once I actually gave it the time, because I understood the problems. I understood money. I understood gold, and Bitcoin just layered into that on this is the future of money.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Wow, that's so interesting. And I love that. But I love that the through line through all of that is like that's something that you're passionate about. You're drawn to and you lead into that direction. And I think that that's so amazing. So How have you seen the space since you got into Bitcoin? How have you seen the space evolve? Because I feel like we're in a really interesting pivotal time at the moment where Bitcoin is really becoming much more legitimized and is becoming much more mainstream. And even in the time that I've been in Bitcoin, I've seen the space evolve and people's attitude towards it really shift and change. What do you think are the most sort of notable things that you've seen throughout that time?
Yeah, it's been crazy, and time. The one thing about time is that always, in hindsight, has gone too fast. That's what I find. But the way Bitcoin has changed since when I first started getting into Bitcoin, I started to speak about it, and I decided, I have a passion for things, and sometimes I like build a business around my passions, and I'll speak about them. But when I first started speaking about Bitcoin publicly, and I started just putting out some content about it, um, I would get messages off people because I've been a businessman. I have a really good reputation in my local area, in my country, even.
Yeah.
To say like, what, then you're getting into this Bitcoin thing. Do you think that's the right way to go? Like, is that not just for tax avoidance or for money laundering or for nefarious purposes? It's a bit of an underground asset. And I did almost have to think of, is this the right thing to do here? Should I expose my reputation for this thing? And that's to where we are today, where we have, you know, the next president of America, likely, the candidates anyway, using it as a way to swing an election. That the way it's changed, it's amazing, it's beautiful, and of course, I'm glad I embraced it. I'm glad I spoke about it with such passion before it was mainstream, before it was the consensus to be pro Bitcoin or understand Bitcoin. I just sort of was. I had a passion for it. I thought that all the narratives that were structured against Bitcoin were incorrect, and my goal was to educate people about really what Bitcoin was, and that job obviously now is a hell of a lot easier because of how much Bitcoin has changed over the years, and it's these things don't happen overnight. But when I look at the beginning to where we are today, it's like, oh my God, it's night and day. Like the whole Bitcoin could be banned was still on the table. Like that's well off the table at this stage.
Yeah, I think we can also bury the Bitcoin as a scam and it's only used by criminals narrative as well. Like we can bury those 2015 headlines and we've really evolved past that, which is amazing. Like I kind of look back even just in the last couple of years of how far we've come. I mean, you mentioned Donald Trump, obviously. I do personally think he fumbled the ball a little bit at the Bitcoin conference. Conflating Bitcoin and crypto is a little bit of a mistake and a few other blunders. But like even outside of that, the net positive, we'd rather have the politicians instead of, choke point 2.0 and trying to completely crush crypto and Bitcoin, or attempt to do so. We'd rather have them behind us and like, creating positive policy around it. So yeah, I think that the evolution, even in the last couple of years, has just ramped up so much. But I love that you still took that step, even though it was uncomfortable. You were putting your reputation on the line, because there is some point that like your personal conviction, you're like, no, hang on a second. I actually believe in myself and my own intelligence, my own ability to do the research and see that these things that are being said about Bitcoin are not necessarily true, and to be able to then take action and still step out and share that information with other people. And I'm sure so many people are so grateful for what you've been doing for a while now with Bitcoin with Dinny. And so there's a couple of facets to Bitcoin with Dinny. So why don't you tell us about some of those? You've got some education going on. You consult for various entities as well. So let us know what you talk about there.
Thanks, Claire. Yeah, Bitcoin with Dinny, we're basically a Bitcoin education company. It's twofold. I have an online community. It's called the Retire Early Club, and it takes all the steps that I took from going. I didn't mention this in my intro, but when I was trying to get wealthy, I actually was very poor. I was living in a mobile home or a caravan, so I was at the very bottom of the financial ladder. And over a period of a decade, I educated myself to take myself from there to being to reaching my financial goals and be able to have my time to spend life as I want. And I sort of layer all that into Retire Early Club. And that was before I understood Bitcoin. And then I bring in the whole Bitcoin element to it and building the pension around it. So Retire Early Club is a community. We meet every 2 weeks on Zoom for live calls. We have 7 different WhatsApp groups on different niches. So we're chatting every day in that. And I think I've got 6 courses on our school platform where, you know, people can come in without knowing anything about Bitcoin or crypto and literally get educated on the whole space. And, you know, it's a year's membership, say, and they work their way through that. And then the second part of our business in Bitcoin with Dinny is consulting. And that's more on a one-to-one basis, where I'll work with individuals or businesses who want to build a Bitcoin strategy or Bitcoin pension, or just be educated on Bitcoin, or the differences, as you mentioned, between Bitcoin and crypto, which, you know, a lot of new people, myself included, I sort of didn't understand that there was such a distinct difference. And I just thought they were all bundled in together. And of course, it's a lot more difficult until you really understand to separate Bitcoin from crypto. So yeah, that's just an overview of what we do on Bitcoin with Dinny.
Okay, that's awesome. So yeah, I really want to speak to the kind of pension side of things. The retire early is so awesome as well, and then building that Bitcoin pension, because I think this is kind of interestingly enough, in traditional finance, like really everything is geared towards boomers. You know, that's where the wealth is, and everything is really geared towards that generation. Whereas I think Bitcoin is a little bit different. It's probably more geared towards millennials, I think, is the focus. But I think that more and more boomers are coming into the Bitcoin space. And so the idea of a pension is probably more relevant to them than to a millennial, although, I mean, it's still, we all still want to retire, right? And, you know, so I think, like, let's talk about that a little bit, because it's a very sort of traditional thing. I mean, definitely, like, I grew up in England, you're in Ireland, like, it's very traditional that people would, you know, work for 40 years or what have you, and then they're going to spend their retirement and live off their pension. And there's a little thing, you know, you're in the investing world, I also understand it. And there's, you know, looking at the kind of macroeconomics, it makes me a little nervous, I'm not going to lie, that there are, you know, our governments really in the West have made promises that they possibly cannot afford to keep. And so this focus, many people's, you know, retirement is tied up in pensions, either government pensions or employment pensions. I know in Australia as well, there was a huge push in Australia, a government program to, the government would actually match your contributions to your retirement funds. So there's a lot of money and a lot of people's future livelihood tied up in these projects, I guess. And it concerns me, like, if anything were to go wrong, or the government starts to default on those payments, or not necessarily default, but I think even in Ireland, I think they already did have a round of reducing government pensions. And so I think Bitcoin really is an interesting way of hedging your retirement, really. So I want to speak to, like, two different groups of people. One group of people who have gone down the traditional route and do have either a government or employment pension. And they may be thinking in the same way as me, that maybe our governments can't afford to meet these promises. And they may be wanting to look at a way to hedge those positions with Bitcoin. And then also I want to talk about the other side, that is also probably a boomer sort of narrative as well. And those people that maybe have already been in Bitcoin, have been diamond handing, laser eyes, hodling for maybe a few cycles. And now they're getting to retirement age and they're like, hey, I want to start living off my Bitcoin. I know that you have a couple of strategies around that. So sorry for the long question, but yeah.
I'm scribbling down some notes here, like I'm pretty dyslexic, so I'm like, oh, there's a lot here, I better take some notes.
It's like
I
five
suppose
questions in one.
first off, Claire, the way I try and explain it to people is, especially people who are, you know, not already invested in Bitcoin or don't get Bitcoin, that having a Bitcoin pension is just another iron in the fire. You know, when you get to sort of boomer age, maybe you've got a traditional pension, maybe you've already accumulated some other assets, maybe you've got a rental property or something like that, or a commercial property, and this is just another iron in the fire. You and I are probably of the belief that this is the best iron to have in the fire, but all I'm trying to do is speak to people where they are to help them understand that it's more risky not to put this iron in the fire and not to create a Bitcoin pension plan than to create a small Bitcoin pension plan. And I'll just explain how I got this across to my parents, because they'd be that age. They are traditional, just normal Irish people, no financial education. they would have done everything that we're sort of told, get a job, work hard, put your money in the bank. And of course, we know from understanding investing and understanding money that that's a really difficult system to get ahead in. The way I explain to people now is when you go to work, you're filling a bucket full of water at a tap. Every day you go to work, you're filling the bucket full of water. And when the bucket is filled with water, now you have enough wealth to retire. But the problem is there's a hole in the bucket. So every day when you're working and filling the bucket, there's water leaking out of the bucket. And what investing is the ability to plug that hole so that actually you can convert your work to actually reach the retirement. So I would have said to my parents, their life savings, their retirement sits in cash, sits in the euro, a terrible asset. So I obviously tried to orange pill them many times, but they're not internet savvy. It's not their generation. My dad has barely ever used the internet. He doesn't have a Facebook account. He calls it the McGoogles and he says, tell them nothing. They know too much. And he's probably right. He'll tell you what birds are due in. He'll tell you what the weather's going to do next week by looking at the sky. He'll tell you what crops are due in fields. Like, he's a man of the physical world. So I can't understand, although we have many conversations about Bitcoin, he'll never understand it. It's not possible for him to. But how I got him over the line was, I said, Dad, I want 5% of your life savings. I want to put 5% of it into Bitcoin. And so I said, well, worst case scenario, I lose 5% of your life savings. It's not really going to affect your retirement. Don't get me wrong. It's going to be,
Want to lose
it's going to be a little bit uncomfortable because you're going to lose 5%, worst case scenario, but it's not going to ruin you. You're not going to lose the house. Life will be okay. And that was fine. He said, like, yeah, Dinny, I trust you. I'm happy with that. Now, in hindsight, that 5%, by risking 5% and leaving 95% in a different asset, the 5% is now worth more than the 95%. So for a tiny little bit of risk, what people would perceive as risk, I would have done the opposite. I would have put the 95% in Bitcoin and the 5% in cash. But for that small amount of perceived risk, I've protected the purchasing power of their entire retirement. And that's a way that I was just able to try and help them understand it and help them to get into Bitcoin and the fact they own Bitcoin without really understanding Bitcoin. And that is the beauty of this thing, is that you don't have to go all in on this thing. Just a very small exposure over a period of years can, as you mentioned, hedge your net worth or your wealth or your retirement or your pension. And that's the power of Bitcoin. What I like about the Bitcoin pension and why I encourage people to do it for themselves is, again, traditionally we're taught you're not smart enough to understand money, you need to outsource, you need to give it to someone else. But with Bitcoin, it's very easy, okay? It's not a case of balancing stocks. It's not a case, it's quite an easy solution. It's just to acquire the thing and acquire it every month. Just like a traditional pension is buying stocks, selling stocks. All I'm doing in a traditional Bitcoin pension, is just buying Bitcoin. Now, the difference is I'm in full control of that, or the individual is in full control of that Bitcoin. They have access to it and they can move it anywhere in the world. Versus in a traditional pension in Ireland, you have to wait until you're not quite old, but you've got to be 67, 60s, or 55 to get a quarter of it, or 50, depending on the rules if you own business and stuff. But you don't have access to your wealth. It's locked up, it's tied away. And as you mentioned, there's a lot of headwinds in macro, and the pensions have got to get through all those headwinds. And in my offices, when I meet people, and they're more of the boomer generation, there's so many horror stories about people who contributed to pensions for 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 40 years, and the pension blew up. So they took all the risk. Someone else made all the money, and they didn't. And I'm like, well, if you're going to build a pension and you're going to take the risk, you should make all the money. So you should do it yourself. And it's quite easy. Yeah, there's a little bit of education and setting it up, but in 90 minutes, I can set someone who hasn't a clue up with a full Bitcoin pension that's going to work for them as long as Bitcoin continues to be successful forever. And so it is insanely simple, and it gives power to the person. It gives you control over that portion of your wealth. It's not locked up in someone else's hands. It's a money you can own, a money you can spend yourself. And with the pensions, they dangled the carrot of the tax incentive. Of the tax. But you're going to pay the tax. You're just going to pay it later, okay? Yeah. And when I was pitched on pensions, like years ago, when I first started making a few bob, and my accountant would say, okay, the business is doing well. And this would be advice to any younger people, and not advice, but maybe just what I done. It was like, right, I can put this into my pension that hopefully if I live another 30 years or 40 years, I might get access to that money, or I can take the hit on the tax today and invest that money into myself first, because I know I'm the asset. And
Right.
you know, by improving yourself, that's the best advice I can ever give anyone, is invest into yourself, like, because you compound whatever investment you make into yourself, whether it's into your health or your education, you get to compound that for every day you have on this planet. So that's what I done. I instead of putting into pension, I invested into myself to help myself be a better businessman, a better entrepreneur, healthier, fitter, stronger, you know, different mindset, and all those cool things. And that in turn turns into, well, now I have the ability to earn much more money right now, instead of having to wait till this pension thing that I've no control over, no understanding how it's working, that I have to just cross my fingers and say, oh, well, hopefully this works out. I get to have control now, and I get to then have the sophistication to build my own plan and manage my own wealth.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think where do you think that mindset comes from? Do you think that comes from that experience that you had early on when you broke your back, and you spent obviously a lot of time you had a lot of time for self-reflection and hospital and things like that. I think that's a really interesting mindset, that you're like, I'm the asset, and I can invest in that. But in terms of like the pensions, there's a lot of trust there that you're putting in the government. There's a lot of trust there you're putting in these pension fund companies. And previously, yeah, they have been trustworthy. Some have been trustworthy, some have not been trustworthy. And it's a case of how much trust do I want to put in them? And I think it has been promoted in a way that the trust is the trustability is exaggerated somewhat, and so I think that, yeah, I think that that's something that is really important with Bitcoin, and something that I see with Bitcoin is it's about personal sovereignty, it's about freedom, but it also comes with personal responsibility, right? And so that's a blessing and a curse, right? Like, it's a blessing to be able to have that personal responsibility, but it also means that we have to be personally responsible for things. And so there is, I think, again, speaking to your parents' story in a way, is it's not that they don't want to have personal responsibility, but maybe it is just they are of a different generation. They're not of the digital generation to be able to really understand or want to learn so much about Bitcoin, to be able to trust it. So how do you sort of explain that to people, or how do you bridge that gap with people?
Yeah, I suppose people have to be open and want to learn, but
Mm,
that's not right. The correct way to phrase that. I'm not saying my parents should be. It's like, I suppose I feel it's my responsibility to
right.
protect my parents, just like they had the responsibility to protect me for a huge portion of my life. You know,
Yeah.
the roles almost reverse, and that's the cycle of life, I suppose. You know, I don't think it's up that my dad should have to learn how to use the internet and should have to learn how to use Bitcoin. Fortunately, you know, he's got some kids, and it's their job to look after him as he's older. So it is difficult, I suppose, if people don't have anyone to do that. But don't get me wrong, in my office, like, I consult with 8-year-olds, and they're like fully want to learn. You know, they mightn't be the most tech savvy, but they're like a sponge for information, and they want to learn. And I'm just like so inspired by that. I'm just like, I hope I'm half as able to keep up and move with the times. Because when I think of an 8-year-old sitting in my office, I just be winding back in my mind going like, what did the world look like when that man was 10,
Right.
20, 30, 40, and how much has it changed? And here he is now, and he's got his laptop and he's got his hardware wallet, and we're self-custodying some Bitcoin from him. It's so inspiring. So some
Yeah.
people are just incredible like that. But I think as Bitcoin develops, um, you know, I'm I'm sort of I don't sort of fit any niche of Bitcoin, because I'm not a Bitcoin maximalist
Mm,
or anything. So I'm just sort of a realist. And you know, Bitcoin maximalists can be like, everyone has to self custody, everyone has to become self sovereign. And I'll be like, yeah, but in the real world, like, my dad's never going to do that. He can't do that. So we're basically saying, sorry, you can't be involved.
mm,
I'm hopeful that as Bitcoin matures, as Bitcoin is built upon, the products are being built so that my dad can just go into the bank. You know, he doesn't even use online banking. He will go into the bank, okay? And he can just give them some of his cash and just say, I want to put that in Bitcoin. And it's that simple, you know, the way he's always done his finances. And
mm.
hopefully Bitcoin gets there one day. And, you know, even with the ETFs, this is making it easier for more inclusion of people who mightn't be as tech savvy or as tech sophisticated or as comfortable with tech as we are. So I'm sort of hopeful for that, and I think we're going there.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think that there's like risks and like there's balance with that also. Like even with the ETFs, I sort of felt that I had a bit of a different like take on it as well than a lot of like other Bitcoiners. I also am not like a Bitcoin maxi. I am in a sense in that I think that Bitcoin is the real innovation in the space. But I also kind of see like the rest of crypto. How do I describe this? Like the rest of crypto, it doesn't mean there's no value there. It doesn't mean there's no innovation there. It's just not the same thing as Bitcoin. I kind of see the rest of crypto as more of an evolution of, the existing financial system that we already have. And, we already live in a proof of stake world. Now, that doesn't mean that, there are companies that are being built today that are being funded by private equity, nothing to do with crypto, nothing to do with Bitcoin. They're still creating awesome things. It doesn't mean that they don't have value, but it just is on a different rails, right? And so I think, that's the kind of like difference with Bitcoin, is that it is a completely different ecosystem. And the thing I think interestingly with the ETFs, I see them as a net positive. Again, I sort of see them like you, that there are people who want to just call their broker and say, get me some Bitcoin, or I want exposure to Bitcoin. And they're never going to read the Bitcoin standard. They're never going to dive into all of the, Bitcoin resources, because maybe they don't have time. They're doing something else, and the ETFs are allowing them that opportunity to still have exposure to Bitcoin. And I think as well, the kind of play, or the more sort of sinister side of the ETFs, is that like Bitcoin is this alternate system to our current financial system. And what the ETFs did was allowed the current financial system to say, okay, well, you're really excited about this Bitcoin thing. We're going to have a vehicle for you to have exposure to it, but you keep your value in our system. And so I think that that's like the bridge between the two. And I think, yeah, at the end of the day, I think it's a net positive. And I also would hope that like when someone has an exposure to Bitcoin through an ETF, they maybe are then more inclined to be interested. Like when you've got some money in it, then you're more inclined to want to be educated a little further with it. But I do want to talk a little bit about self-custody as well, because I am a diehard self-custody person. I obviously don't believe that exchanges are banks. We shouldn't be keeping Bitcoin on exchanges. But there are some sort of discussions around self-custody, which I agree with. I always recommend being diversified as well in your self-custody, because it is that one point of failure there as well. So if you only have one cold storage and everything is in that one cold storage, and something happens with your ledger or Trezor or whatever, then you're going to have problems. So you talk about various different custody options, whether it be multi-sig, things like that. So can we have a bit of a chat about your perspective on that?
Yeah, perfect. I'd love to. And just on our last thing, I'll just make this one point. The boomers have all the wealth, and how Bitcoin, like I'm very similar to you in that Bitcoin is the innovation. When I say I'm not a Bitcoin maximalist, I just mean I'm not like a steak eating, the full narrative Bitcoiner. And sometimes it can be like that unless you're in the tribe and do exactly what we all do. I'm like, fuck that, we're all different. Do your own thing. Everyone can use Bitcoin. Bitcoin's for everyone. The boomers have the wealth, and how Bitcoin becomes more powerful is by more people using it. And the ETFs are, ultimately a way of bringing Bitcoin to more people, allowing Bitcoin to become more powerful. And I agree 100% with what you said. It's the easy on-ramp to learn about Bitcoin, to understand it, to fall down the rabbit hole, to start, you ring up, you buy your ETF in Bitcoin. 2 years later, you're starting to watch a few Bitcoin podcasts because this Bitcoin part of your portfolio is performing the best. 2 years later, you've bought a hardware wallet. 2 years later, you're just like a sovereign person, and you're out of the ETF and you're fully in some sort of a self-custody solution. You've ditched all your stocks, and you've got a decent proportion of your net worth in Bitcoin. So I think there's definitely it's a positive, and it's going to be really interesting. Onto the custody side of things, the way I see Bitcoin a journey into Bitcoin and Bitcoin custody, I always describe it to my customers as like it's a ladder of steps, or it's a series of steps. And sometimes people can become paralyzed because they're looking at the 10th step and thinking, I need to understand what this is before taking the first step. The first step is just to buy Bitcoin and get off zero. And it doesn't matter where you buy it, because the chances are you're not going to buy too much because you don't really understand what it is.
Yeah.
So in terms of how to buy the Bitcoin, or how to store the Bitcoin, sorry, it's different for different people. For some people, the easiest, like, it's more risky for me to say to them, I want you to get this ledger thing, and I want you to get the steel wallet, you can buy them here, and I want you to set it up, and I want you to move that Bitcoin off it the second you buy 10 grand's worth. I'm like, which is more risky? Coinbase, leaving it on Coinbase, or getting this person who has no idea what I'm talking about to rush into this situation where they try and take self-custody? It's like, well, if it was my Bitcoin, I'd probably prefer to leave it with Coinbase than to have them custody it for me when they're literally only learning about this. So things do change as we progress. I think for me, we have you can buy Bitcoin on an exchange, or you can buy it with a broker or an ETF, whatever. And then when you decide, okay, one of the inventions of Bitcoin is it's a money you can own. And if I leave it with a counterparty, well, like, I don't own it, because if you read the terms and conditions, I didn't read them, okay? But someone has told me that they own the Bitcoin once you leave it with them. So you're sort of dismissing the unique invention of Bitcoin. So eventually, I think we come to a point that we're like, okay, it's a money I can own. How do I own it? What's self-custody? How do I self-custody? In terms of, like, I really like multi-sig, and I am an advisor for a company called the Bitcoin Advisor. I was a customer of the Bitcoin Advisor before I worked with the Bitcoin Advisor, because I just seen it as this is the best solution to hold Bitcoin. I had Peter Dunworth on my podcast a couple of years ago, and it was after the podcast, we were just chatting, and he was telling me about the product, and I was like, why the hell didn't we talk about this in the podcast? Like, I need to get my Bitcoin into this arrangement. This is the best way to hold Bitcoin. So I became a customer, and then Peter got to know me and seen my work and was like, Dinny, we'd love to have you on the team. So now I'm actually an advisor with the Bitcoin Advisor. And the difference between, say, single sig, where I might have, one ledger device and my Bitcoin is protected by this one device.
Right.
I look at that as single point of failure.
Yes.
Okay, because it's only one key protecting the Bitcoin. And loads of things can go wrong, because I know some Bitcoiners, nothing will go wrong because these people are so careful and will devote so much attention to it. But that's not me. Most people in the world are busy people, and we make mistakes. Humans make mistakes. It's part of being human. So I don't want my entire Bitcoin pension to be able to lose it on a single point of failure. I make one mistake and I can lose everything and I can go back to zero. That would scare me. And also, from having in the Bitcoin with Dinny office, like, nearly every week, I deal with clients and customers who only find me after the fact, but they have made a mistake and they've literally lost their Bitcoin by some means. So that terrifies me. So I think a better way of custodying Bitcoin is in a multi-sig, where rather than just one key, one point of failure, you might have 3 keys. Okay, so you can have a catastrophe with any one of the 3 keys and it doesn't affect, you don't lose the Bitcoin. So the way I describe it to people is, with single key, it's like a bullet to the head, it's game over. Whereas with the multi-sig, if something happens to a key, it's just like a little graze on your arm. You put a plaster and you go, oh, Ledger's after rug pulling everyone and giving the private keys to the governments, and that was one of my keys. Well, luckily I didn't have all my Bitcoin on Ledger and it was just a key on my multi-sig. I might just replace it with a Trezor or with any other brand available. So with the multi-sig way of custodying, and with custody, I probably should mention this, there's no absolute perfect solution. There's trade-offs and there's what's right for the individual. For me personally, and for the majority of my customers who have, a meaningful sum of Bitcoin, and meaningful is it meaningful to you? Not, do you have 1 Bitcoin, do you have 10, do you have whatever? Is this a large amount of capital for you as an individual? It makes sense to have it in a multi-sig where you're not having to trust any of the providers. You don't have to trust the Bitcoin Advisor, they can go out of business. You don't have to trust a technology provider if you're using on-chain, they can go out of business, makes no difference. You don't have to trust yourself, you can even go and die. And because we set up an estate plan protocol as part of the service, us as the Bitcoin Advisor, through probate, through death certificates, will have the Bitcoin in the hands of whoever you want it for. So sort of every possible scenario that can go wrong with Bitcoin custody is mitigated for. And for me, that's why I think multi-sig with a collaborative custody. So not multi-sig where I have to hold 2 ledgers, because now that's twice the responsibility for me. I don't want that. Okay. So I only have to custody one key, and even if I lose my key or my key gets stolen, someone comes to my house and wants to steal it or whatever, I still don't have they still don't have the ability to actually get my Bitcoin. So I have two separate companies on different sides of the world and different time zones and different currencies and different regulators, both custodying a key for me. And for me, that's the perfect situation at the moment. Do I think there'll be something better in the future? Possibly. Like, Bitcoin is in its early stages. It's only going to get better and easier to custody it, and entrepreneurs are going to build better products and better fail safes. So I think it's a changing landscape on the best way of custody. But for me at the moment, a multi-sig with a collaborative sort of system is the best way to hold, or the safest way for me to hold Bitcoin. And that'd be the advice I give my clients.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so interesting. And just to sort of clarify that for people, that when we talk about multi-sig, it's not like it's not someone else custodying your Bitcoin. It's just splitting the how do I describe this? It's just splitting the access points, really. So when you're fully self-custodying, it's only you that holds the key. And if anything happens to those 24 or 12 words and you forget them or whatever, you can no longer access your Bitcoin. Whereas when you have multi-sig, then you need 2 out of the 3 or whatever setup you have to be able to access them. So it is a form of self-custody. It's not like I don't know, say a company that, like, say Celsius, which went out of business last year, right? You were handing your Bitcoin over to them to custody. Multi-sig is not the same thing. Correct.
Yeah, correct. No, multi-sig, it's pretty much like single sig in that
Yeah,
if
exactly.
if I'm speaking to my multi-sig arrangement, like I'm the only one with the login, I'm the only one with the 2FA to access the vault.
Yes.
And within the vault, there's 3 separate keys. My job is to mind one of the keys.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So it's fantastic. It's a very interesting option. And I do think you're right. I do think that as things evolve, they will move forward. And so we're seeing lots of different phases and lots of different stages of Bitcoin, and people being able to enter Bitcoin, like as you said, through the ETFs, or, I think everybody also comes in for a different reason. Like some people, like the initial cryptographers, then you had like the diehard libertarians and there's a phase of sort of like Bitcoin awakening for everyone, and it triggers people in a different way. And I think that we have to remain flexible with that as a community. We have to remain open and inviting for that as well, and understand that people are coming from a different perspective and a different space. And so at what point do you think that people should be self-custodying? Because a lot of people still do hold, like even you said, about you'd rather someone hold it on Coinbase rather than, if they don't know what they're doing, with self-custody. And so at what point do you have, I mean, I guess it wouldn't be a dollar figure, because what means something to someone, is nothing to someone else. So do you have like a percentage of net worth that you're saying, okay, you've got this now on an exchange, it's time to really learn about self-custody and move that forward?
Yeah, the way I try and explain it to people, Clara, and to help them understand it, is you can get started in Bitcoin immediately. Okay. Let's say in terms of the Retire Early Club, how I structure it is they get in, we give them a secure on-ramp where they can go and buy, and that place will custody it. And in my opinion, it's one of the best places. If you're not going to custody your Bitcoin yourself, well, this is custody in a multi-sig, and legally that custodian doesn't own the Bitcoin. So should anything happen to the entity, unlike Celsius, unlike Voyager, the assets have to be there. Because if the assets aren't there, someone's going to jail this afternoon because it's illegal for the assets to be used.
Right.
So if you're not going to self-custody, this would be better than just using a generic exchange where they can use your assets as liquidity. If something happens, technically the assets should be there. So it goes through the bankruptcy, you get back your assets.
Yeah.
But as soon as they're doing that, we have the custody course, and you're straight into it. So if someone, whether they want to self-custody or not, like, because let's say I get someone, and this happened a lot, like, people come in, they're like, I've 20 grand to invest. I'm not going to say, right, here's a wallet, set it up, blah, blah, blah. Because I've had this. I'll tell you a funny story. A fella came to me, he had a couple of Bitcoins, He wanted them off the exchange because it was so risky. This is a couple of years ago. We put them on his hardware wallet. I gave him all the instruction on, excuse me, how to store it, where to store it, split the private key up, blah, blah, blah. And then 6 months later, he contacted me to say, Dinny, my car was broken into and my ledger was stolen out of the glove box. And I was thinking, like, you were at me 6 months ago. Like, what does a man want? Why was the ledger in the glove box of your car? And he was like, well, I forgot to take it out. And, you know, what can you say in a situation like this? I was like, oh my God.
Wow.
So you mean the ledger's been in the glove box of the car for 6 months with the seed phrase, the recovery phrase sitting beside it. And there's a couple of Bitcoins on this wallet. And I'm like, well, there's actually nothing we can do here. And it actually ruined my week. I was like, is there anything else I could have done? I'm like, no, I hammered home the point of how to store this, separate them, blah, 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 blah. And then luckily the next week he rang me back. He says, oh, I actually found it. I must have taken it out of the car and put it somewhere else. I was like, get into multi-sig immediately. You are not competent to mine this Bitcoin. So it's from real world experiences of seeing humans do human things that I've sort of developed the process that I use with all my clients now. And so I will get someone, I even had a client in yesterday and we set up his wallet, blah, 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 gave him the wallet. There's nothing on it, but he has to go away and mine that wallet now and store it and see, is he competent on updating a wallet with no Bitcoin on it? So straight away he's learning. So when the time actually does come when he's like, I'm going to custody some of my Bitcoin. He's been using the wallet for 6 months. He's had it. He's updated. He's plugged it in a few times. Then I'll get him to put €100 on it. You know, and then he'll build up. So it's not a case of we set up the wallet, but junk, put my 20 grand on my wallet tomorrow. It's no, I've been using this thing. I've had €100, then I had 1,000, and they build up. So you're building, as you're becoming more competent and more experienced, you're able to build up how much of your own assets are under your own management. And I think that's the safest way to sort of move into self-custody.
Yeah, that's absolutely. And that's a really good way of looking at it as well, because I've always sort of, I've always probably had, it's probably a harsh perspective, but I've always sort of had the attitude of like, where are we as a society? Because once yes, of course, anything that you do first time is going to be uncomfortable. It's going to be clunky. You might mess it up, anything that you do. But realistically, like self-custodying your Bitcoin is actually easier to do than using your bank app on your phone, in my opinion. So I've always had the opinion that it's like, if we as a society cannot be responsible for 12 or 24 words, like we have bigger problems than Bitcoin, that's always sort of my attitude,
Fair point.
But I do love your approach that you're kind of like walking people through that instead of like, hey, put your life savings on something that you have no clue actually how to use or what it is. And, that's also going to create this element of fear and uncertainty. And actually, that's when we make the mistakes. I know that when I'm super paranoid about something, I don't know what I'm doing, I'm conscious of it, that's when I stuff things up, So I love the way that you walk people through that. It's really, really fantastic. And
Yeah, you're just trying to serve people to where they are. Like, I suppose if people hire me as their consultant, they're paying me to make sure nothing goes wrong. So that's why I sort of have this process, and it mightn't be the quickest way, but I think from experience in doing this is our 5th year in business. I think it's the best way, and that touch wood, nothing has gone wrong or ever goes wrong, and it's because once we follow the process.
Yeah, and I think it's a very realistic approach as well, because we can be very idealistic. And I love the fact that you said, like, I'm not the standard Bitcoin maxi stake eating, all of that kind of stuff, because that was one of the things that when I came into Bitcoin, I'm like, where do I fit into this community? Because like, I don't own a gun. I'm not a libertarian. I don't like all of these very, Bitcoin, ish stereotypes. And, anyone that's listening to that feels a little bit like that, it's really not like that. There's a vast array of people within the Bitcoin community. But I love that you're very, very practical and realistic about the steps to take to get people in, because we can all be really idealistic and be like, well, we should all be cryptographers and, come from that perspective, but it's not realistic. The average general public has a life to live. Their life is not Bitcoin. And so I think I love that. Love you put that.
And the one thing that I see, understand with Bitcoin is like, we're trying to sell Bitcoin to the people who aren't in Bitcoin. We're trying to teach them on how to do it. And with the toxicity that can be surrounded Bitcoin, like no one has ever sold anything by being nasty to someone else. So, you know, I just, and one thing, and the reason probably I'm aware of this is because I've been on the wrong side of it. I set up Ireland's biggest Bitcoin conference 3-4 years in a row now. And I would see people in the comments going like, oh, he is a shitcoiner. And that because they went onto my website and they would have seen the word crypto mentioned. So, and it's just like, you've never met me. You've never been to the conference. No one has ever said this conference is anything other than a Bitcoin conference.
Yeah.
I use the word crypto on my website because the majority of people who don't understand Bitcoin, Bitcoin and crypto is the same thing. Yeah. So because I know how to sell to people, it's like you tell them what they want to hear and then you teach them what they need to hear. If you don't have that ability, you can't orange pill someone unless you can get them in your community, in front of you, to teach them the difference between Bitcoin and crypto. But if you say Bitcoin, 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 you discount a lot of the world because a lot of the world sees Bitcoin as too expensive. I missed the boat on that. I need crypto. So I know if I can advertise to someone and they think that, oh yeah, Dinny does crypto as well. But then I get them in, I say, over a period of time, we actually teach them the difference and go, yeah, I know you thought you were going to get richer in crypto, but let me tell you, from my experience and all the other people who have retired early, this is the actual strategy we're using and it involves understanding Bitcoin.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. I think there is room for that. And I think also it comes from a space of that a lot of Bitcoiners have also either themselves wasted a lot of time or lost a lot of money or seen people scammed or whatever. And so they choose to put their time only in Bitcoin. But and I get that. I agree with them also to a certain extent, but I agree with you as well. The toxicity around that doesn't need to exist.
Yeah, there's no one
it's not helpful.
correct answer. There's no one way. And I suppose after being in Bitcoin for a while, you realize that, you know, it can be toxic. There can be a groupthink mentality, which is almost, it's like, that's what we were fighting against. Now we've just created another one in Bitcoin. So yeah, you just got to be your own person. And I suppose all my life I'm fortunate in that I sort of don't mind being an outlier, and I sort of find that's where I'm happiest is when I'm an outlier and when I'm not in consensus with a massive group.
Yeah, I'm the same. And so the next point that I wanted to sort of talk to you about, and this is something that I really don't hear anything about, you know, and I guess maybe I'm just not in that algorithm. You know, I'm more in the algorithm of like, you know, I'm relatively young, you know, and have other incomes coming in. And so, you know, I haven't sold a single Bitcoin out of my cold storage at all. But I do know that, again, speaking to the boomers, and you're right, the boomers is where the wealth is. And so we kind of need to be a bit aware that we need to service that market as well. And so to the Bitcoiner who has been stacking sats for the last couple of cycles, and they're now coming up to retirement age, and they're like, you know what, I want to start utilizing my Bitcoin. Do you have some strategies around that?
Yeah, I will. I'll talk to a couple of them. In terms of, and I'll just start at the beginning with people newer, and I'll work towards people who are in for a couple of cycles.
Right.
Again, the get rich quick is the attraction into Bitcoin, that you can make loads of money and make it really fast. And then we get orange pilled and we realize it's not about getting euros, it's about getting Bitcoin. You know, I value my net worth in Bitcoin. I measure it in Bitcoin, and I price things against Bitcoin, not against the euro. You know, although the euro is my currency, I spend euros, I save Bitcoin. And that's worked out really, really well for me. And I think it will continue to work out well for people. Not financial advice, of course, I don't know the future, but you know, fundamentally it looks highly likely that's going to work out if you save in Bitcoin and spend in euros or whatever your currency happens to be. So initially people are trying to sell their Bitcoin at a position to buy euros. And it's about transitioning your thinking that, like, I think every Bitcoiner, there's 3 steps to their strategy. The first is accumulation. And I'm still in an accumulation strategy because I'm, can I say I'm yet relatively young as well? I think I will.
You absolutely can. I just claimed it, so you can too. Carry on.
I'd assume you're relatively much younger than me, but I'm still accumulating Bitcoin. Okay, but there's three steps to the Bitcoin journey. There's the accumulation phase where you're accumulating. And Simon Dixon taught me this. Every month, my goal is to have more Bitcoin than the month before. Okay, so I constantly just use Bitcoin as my savings. Um, After that is the hodl stage. And that's just where you're holding the Bitcoin. So let's say someone like Simon. Well, now I know he still accumulates, but let's just use Simon for an example. He's been buying Bitcoin since it was $1 or whatever. In terms of how much Bitcoin he can increase, how much percentage he can increase his stack when he spent a decade buying Bitcoin at under 100 and now it's 60 grand, you know, he could throw all the money in the world at it for the next couple of years and not even increase his stack by 1%. So perhaps he's better off just consuming, upgrading his lifestyle and consuming and just allowing his Bitcoin to sit there so he doesn't have to sell down the Bitcoin. You're always trying to keep that Bitcoin intact.
Yeah.
Because the longer you can hodl it and defer your gratification with Bitcoin, because it's increasing its adoption, which means it's increasing in purchasing power, the better. And that's just a principle of investing, that the longer you can allow something to compound or the longer you can allow something to capital appreciate, as Bitcoin does, the better for you. And then the third phase is the consuming phase. So it's the accumulation phase, the hodl phase, and then the consumption phase or the spending phase. And when it gets there, the first point that I'd always communicate to my customers and people I'm talking to, I'm like, I don't know how we're going to be able to leverage Bitcoin in 5 years or 10 years because entrepreneurs are going to build amazing products. And if I knew what they were going to do, I'd be looking to raise money off VCs and do it. Like, so I'm not sure, but I know that there's going to be amazing ways to leverage your Bitcoin. But here's just a really simple Dinny strategy, and I call it the golden goose. So as you said, I've been saving in Bitcoin. I might have done a couple of cycles and I've got a nice nest egg. Let's just say I own €1 million worth of Bitcoin, just for a nice round figure. And let's just say it's in 15 years time, just for ease of math. So Bitcoin is around 30 years, we'll say. I go onto Google and I just say, how much is Bitcoin appreciating per year? Google has 30 years of data now. So it's just going to spit out a figure. It's going to say 40%. I'm like, okay, if it's going up at 40% and I own $1 million, that portfolio is approximately going to make 400 grand's worth of equity. So I can safely spend 100 grand this year. And in purchasing power terms, I'll never run out of money. So every year when I go to withdraw my Bitcoin, I just find out, well, what's the average it's accumulating? And maybe I spend 25% of that or 50% less of that. And that's the golden goose. That I'm not killing the golden goose. And to get the golden goose, you need to do Dinny's 3 stages. You need to accumulate enough that the goose is big enough. Like, there's no point in me having 20 grand of Bitcoin, because if I start spending it today, you know, I am going to run out of money. I'm going to destroy it because I haven't allowed it to capital appreciate enough. So that'd be one way, really simple strategy. Second way is to borrow against it. I've sort of messed around with this just for small sums. And again, this is going to get much easier. Entrepreneurs are going to build products with fail safes and backups and make it really transparent that you can borrow against it. And again, would I borrow against, if I had $1 million in Bitcoin, would I borrow against $1 million in Bitcoin? Hell no. I might borrow against 50 grand's worth of the Bitcoin or maybe 100 grand's, you know, small percentages. And again, it's about letting the nest egg build enough so that if you are going to take leverage on it, you're taking leverage on a small percentage of it, just in case you're wrong, so it doesn't hurt you. And then the third way, again, is we had the yield products. They all blew up, okay? But peer-to-peer lending, the concept that Celsius had initially, before they started getting into all the other stuff of just peer-to-peer lending, like, that is, to me, a legitimate use case, and it is a way of me leveraging my Bitcoin. And in 10 years' time, you know, maybe I can do it with much more trusted financial institutions which have a longer reputation, and maybe I can put an insurance on it. And, you know, so possibly in the future, there will be something there with that. So while I can't give people the perfect answer of today, how do you spend your Bitcoin? Well, it is pretty simple. If you have enough in Bitcoin and you want to spend some of it and you're of the age to spend it, well, you know, life's for living. It's ultimately you saved in that Bitcoin and took the risk in that Bitcoin, or got yourself educated so you understood risk better. You know, consume the Bitcoin, swap it for fiat, or spend the Bitcoin if you can spend Bitcoin.
Yeah. Yeah, I do. I think that as well. I think that there will be options. You know, entrepreneurs also learn lessons from other entrepreneurs, from the failures of other entrepreneurs. That's how we build, that's how we grow, and that's how we evolve, like as an industry, you know, as a society even. And so I agree with you. I think that there are going to be much better products. I think you know, Celsius, Voyager, those sorts of things were phase one. And you know, there are going to be other iterations of that, and it's only kind of going to improve and get better. So yeah, so that's super interesting. That's yeah. And I'm sure I really do feel that those sorts of things are going to become like bigger narratives as we go forward. And, you know, as more and more boomers enter the space as well, you know, whether it be through ETFs or whether their kids are helping them buy Bitcoin. And, you know, so I think that that kind of products to service that section of society as well is just going to increase for sure. And so before we close this off, is there anything else that you really want to add? Tell us a little bit about the Bitcoin conference in Ireland. This is so exciting.
Yeah, you will have to get you over to Dublin and see the family, Claire.
Exactly. I'm due a visit. It's not a lie. I was just thinking that. I was like, I wonder if I could tie in a visit to my family with a Bitcoin conference. That'd be great.
Yeah, defo. It runs in May every year, and it sort of started off as a small meetup, and then I was like, all right, let's call it a conference, and we got 100, and then we got 200, and this year we had about 350. So it seems to be it's growing like Bitcoin. It's doubling every year on average at the moment. So, yeah, it's fantastic. We do all the normal things that the conferences do. We have panels, we have presentations, we have a good bit of networking, and we have a big party after it, which is the best part.
It'll be a lot of fun. Bitcoiners times Irish people. That's a lot of fun. That's a good time.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Okay, that's so cool. And yeah, so is there anything that you really feel that I think we've covered a lot in this episode, actually. Is there anything that you feel really on your heart to share to communicate with people that we haven't covered?
I suppose I'll just finish with from my own personal story, from being someone who's struggled for money and now in a really fortunate position where, you know, I can spend my time doing only things that I enjoy doing, is that anybody can do it. Like in terms of the traditional educational system, I would have been a failed kid. I would have been terrible at exams, but I think throwing yourself into Bitcoin, there's going to be so much opportunities in it. And although financially, Bitcoin mightn't fix your life overnight, okay? But I've seen this in our community. Bitcoin changes you as a person. Once you start to go down the rabbit hole, because it's hopeful, like life's about, to me, I try and be positive because like I don't know if I have it tomorrow. So being positive just helps you have a better tomorrow, but it also helps you have a better now. And by being in Bitcoin, when you understand that the future is likely going to be much brighter than the present. So be happy today because the future looks really good. And so Bitcoin changes you, changes you as a person. I find that people who go down the Bitcoin rabbit hole, although they mightn't be rich overnight financially, they start to become richer as a person. They start to consider their health a little bit more, their relationships, their life, the present moment, you know, all these sort of things. And I've seen that both personally in myself, how being involved in Bitcoin has changed me a little bit for the positive, and also in customers and the community that I'm exposed to of people when I see them come in and they've all these, you know, negative and conspiracy theories and the world is doomed. And it's just like, let me just teach you about this magical thing called Bitcoin. And then I see them 2 years later, 3 years later, and it's like the world is so bright and life's so easy now.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's awesome. I heard in another podcast that you did that I'd listened to that you were like, you know what? No one has ever lost money by holding Bitcoin for more than 4 years.
Yeah.
So, you know, I think that that's something that people do need to keep in mind. Like it's not an instant get rich quick tomorrow. You know, those days of you know, people that bought it at $5 and what have you, there were very, very few people that were able to do that, had an understanding to do that. Lots of them probably sold it. I probably would have too. And the risk profile of Bitcoin at that point was so different than it is today. And so, you know, it is a slower process now, but it's also a more, sure process. You can be more confident in it as well. And I love that you said that it does. Bitcoin is hope. I hear a lot of people say that too. And there are a lot of crazy things going on in the world all the time. Just turn on the news. There's something crazy happening. But
Turn it off.
yeah, exactly. That's the best thing that you can do for yourself is turn it off and and dial into Bitcoin and move into that space where there is hope. And you also, I think one of the biggest things as well is that you want to be aware of what's going on in the world to some extent. But how much time do you want to spend with your head in a world where you have no agency? And the beautiful thing about Bitcoin is that it gives you back your power in a way. You have agency in this world. And, that's really hopeful. I love that you are so positive and you teach other people to be as well. And so thank you so much for joining me, Dinny. It was lovely having you.
Yeah, thanks, Claire. It was really awesome to get the opportunity to come on and chat to you and meet you. Really enjoyed it.
For sure. Enjoy too. We'll chat again soon for sure.
Okay, thank you.